So let's talk a little bit about large practices providing better quality than small practices. I think this is a myth. There are a lot of people who would argue with me on this, I believe that their information comes back from the maybe the turn of this century, the 2000 area, where there was plenty of studies which showed that hospital systems and larger practices had the money to buy all the computers and software necessary so that they can start tracking their data, and therefore they were able to provide higher quality than smaller practices. The question really becomes it goes back, is tracking data the end-all be-all that it needs to be? In fact, my argument would be that small practices, even solo practices, can be on the cutting edge of high quality. And what I mean by solo practices are doctors who don't have any staff at all. They work by themselves in an office, and that's it. So let's talk a little bit about the way the current system is set up. I put down Feeling Groovy. That goes back to the Simon and Garfunkel song in the 70s, where they said, slow it down, you move too fast, you got to make the moments last. It's one of those problems that I see in medicine today where we're constantly running around. We are running from room to room and burning out at crazy rates because we never have time to slow it down. So the argument that you get, and this is, I think, is a myth. The payment is so poor I have to see at least 4 to 5 patients an hour in order to make ends meet. It's all about the payment. Now I would agree that the payment is totally dysfunctional. We get paid in a way which absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. However, with the current payment structure, we can see less than 1 patient an hour and net more than $150,000 a year, and it'd be legal. Let's look into that a little bit. So let's have fun with math. The Medicare allowable, let's do a home visit only practice. You don't have any overhead at all except for your car, your laptop, and your malpractice are going to be the main ones. So Medicare allowable for Virginia, 99349, which is the most common home visit code, allows $119.34. If you see 7 patients a day, 5 days a week, 46 weeks a year, that makes $192,000 in gross revenue. Again, if you subtract off, wear and tear on the car, you subtract off your malpractice, and you subtract off the cost of the computer system, you're still going to probably be over $150,000 a year in net revenue. So obviously I know that you're saying, yeah, but John, you tricked us because we were thinking about office visit practices. Well, okay, let's look at office-based practices. Let's average the Medicare allowable for a 99213 and a 99214. You get $83.84 a visit in the state of Virginia. Some places are obviously going to be much more or much less depending on where you live. If you multiply that by 10 patients a day, 5 days a week, you come up with, again, $192,000 a year in gross revenue. So actually, if you bill for any new patients, any physicals, office labs, things like that, of course you'll collect probably well over $200,000 in gross revenue. So the question then is, well, if the average family physician sees 25 patients a day, and some family physicians see up to 60 patients a day, why? I mean, why? Why are we running around in circles seeing so many patients a day if we know that 10 patients a day will generate $200,000 in revenue? I mean, why are we doing that? Well, let's look at the typical office and some of the dysfunctions in the typical office. What we see is that a normal office is a bit chaotic. You have a whole bunch of people working with the doctor in order to try and get things done. And by the way, this typical office structure doesn't even show the insurance and all the other stuff there. So everybody has a defined role. For instance, the secretary answers the phone, schedules appointments, takes messages, updates demographics, HIPAA information, collects the copay. So everybody has a defined role. Now you can argue that, oh, well, wait a minute, John, if we have electronic medical records, then we don't need a medical records person. And my answer is yes, but then you probably need at least a part-time IT person I didn't put down somebody to do insurance prior authorizations and things like that, because that, of course, needs to be done now. So, the different roles will change over time, but the number of people kind of usually remains pretty constant. So here's the problem with the office. The problem is that the only person generating any revenue is the provider. We only get paid if we do something medical. And the vast majority of primary care is evaluation and management. So it's seeing the patient. The more personnel you have, the more patients the provider needs to see in a day. So for every person you add, the treadmill starts to speed up. The more personnel, also though, the larger the office has to be, because you got to put them somewhere. Finally, you also need more computers, more networking, more phone lines. So for every person you add to your office, it's not just the cost of their salary, but it's all these other intangibles that come together to make that person quite expensive. Even worse, as costs increase over time, more than reimbursement, which has happened in the last 10 to 15 years, the treadmill of having to see patients goes up even more. So now you're running even faster just to try and bring the same amount home, even if you have the same number of employees. But the problem is, the more people you put on a team, the worse the coordination becomes. This again goes back to the Starfield call. So the more people you have, it's not just a matter of it costing you more, but your office is getting more chaotic. So the question is, how do you really evaluate chaos in an office? And one Saturday I was sitting around kind of pondering this thought, and I came up with the algebraic equation for the number of lines of communication in an office. It seemed like a simple way to evaluate the amount of chaos in a typical office. And what you'll see is that when you look at the lines of communication, it follows the n times n minus 1 equation. So if you only have two people, as I do in my office, me and my nurse, you have 2 times 1, or 2 lines of communication, me to her, her to me. But in this example, where you have 6 different people in the office, you'll have 6 times 5, or 30 lines of communication. If you have 10 people in the office, then you're up to 90 lines of communication. And what you can see is, just by following this simple algebraic equation, that by adding even one person to your office, chaos goes up dramatically. And so let's look at the time constraints. Ostaby did this article way back in 2005, but it's just really remarkable, where he said, let's look at the amount of time it takes to really take good care of 2,500 patients. And what he came up to was, it takes 22.2 hours a day to take care of 2,500 patients. So basically, no way that we can do it and do it well. So how do we fit 22 hours of work into an 8-hour day? What happens when we try and do that? And what we find is that, indeed, you have to hire more people, which increases the chaos, leads to communication failure. You have poor patient access because you can't see that number of patients. You have chaotic phone systems because they're jammed with people trying to get in for an appointment. You have overbooked physicians who are always running behind, feeling terrible about throwing a prescription across the room to somebody who has questions. You have questionable continuity because, in order to solve this problem, many times we hire other providers to help us, whether they be mid-level or other, and so you work kind of in a first come first serve thing, and there's a loss of continuity. And basically the practice is finance oriented, not patient oriented, and that starts to create all kinds of issues. Overhead is the albatross around your neck, threatening to drown your relationship with your patient. That is the big problem, is the overhead. And I'm going to stop right here for this part of the YouTube video.